This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
The World Health Organization grants emergency use approval to China's Sinopharm vaccine. Africa lags behind in COVID-19 vaccinations as the World Health Organization warns that another wave of infections could hit the continent. And experts want Uganda to pay reparations to the DRC for crimes committed in Ituri province. Welcome to Africa Live on CGTN with me, Beatrice Marshall, in Nairobi. We'll bring you the details on those stories in just a moment, but first, here's Uche Okoronkwa with the day's business headlines. Uche.
Thank you, Beatrice. And here's a look at what's happening on Africa Live Biz. Zimbabwe lists an infrastructure bond for the first time in 20 years. And Sudan restricts commodity imports to ease forex shortages. Of course, all that coming up within the program. For now, back to you, Beatrice.
Uche, thank you. The World Health Organization has given the green light to the Chinese vaccine made by Sinopharm for global emergency use. It becomes the fifth vaccine backed by the World Health Organization following Pfizer, BioNTech, Johnson & Johnson, AstraZeneca and Moderna. The approval affirms the efficacy and safety of the vaccine, which has already been approved for use in dozens of countries. Well, let's look at Africa's challenges because the World Health Organization has warned of a new wave of COVID-19 infections in Africa due to low vaccine rollout and supply challenges. Less than 2% of the 1 billion COVID-19 vaccine doses that have been given globally have been administered in Africa. CGTN's Daniel Arapmoy reports.
Many African countries are still facing challenges of rolling out large-scale vaccination campaigns. Some, like Tanzania, Madagascar, Burkina Faso, Chad, Burundi, the Central African Republic and Eritrea, are yet to launch inoculations.
With delays and shortages of vaccine supplies, African countries are slipping further behind the rest of the world in the COVID-19 vaccine rollout, now accounting for only 1% of the vaccines administered worldwide, down from 2% a few weeks ago.
Shipments of COVID-19 vaccines have temporarily ground to a halt or at least slowed down in Africa. Only around half of the 37 million doses shipped to the continent have been administered so far. And with new COVID-19 variants being detected in some countries, the risk of a new wave of infections in Africa remains high.
We need to get the available vaccines into people's arms fast. This requires investments in delivery capacities to mobilize the people and the resources needed to roll out these campaigns in every province, including partnering with the private sector where it's feasible.
Variant B1617, which was first detected in India, has now been reported in Uganda and Kenya. The WHO has recommended that countries prioritize getting the first vaccine dose to as many people in high-risk categories as possible. The agency says the current constraints can only be addressed quickly if countries with surplus doses share them with those in need. But Africa can only hope that such donations are given fast enough to prevent severe COVID-19 cases and help save lives. With new variants circulating, low vaccination levels and population fatigue in adhering to preventive measures, the conditions seem ripe for a resurgence of infections. Many African governments, however, want to avoid that scenario. Daniel Arapmoy, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Well, let's return to our headline story this hour, where the World Health Organization has given the green light to the Chinese vaccine made by Sinopharm for global emergency use. Well, let's get more on this now and cross over to Tony Waterman in Brussels. Tony, a major announcement there after a rigorous review of the Sinopharm vaccine. Tell us more about this decision.
Yeah, you're right. This is a major announcement. This is the first Chinese vaccine to receive WHO approval, the sixth in their arsenal, and also the first non-Western vaccine to get the green light. What the WHO is recommending is that the vaccine be used in adults over the age of 18. They said that it has an efficacy rate of about 79%, and that is across all age groups. And they said that while there's very scarce data on this over 60 age group, they're still recommending that the vaccine be used in older individuals, that there's no age limits imposed on it, because they believe that it has most likely the same efficacy and will work just as well in those older age groups. They said they had no reason to believe otherwise, although they are asking countries to be very diligent in tracking these individuals so that they can receive updated information. The WHO's technical team spent 2 weeks reviewing all the data that was available on the Sinopharm vaccine, and what they were really looking for are three major things. First and foremost, that it was a safe vaccine, that it also had an efficacy over 50%, and that the manufacturing process met standards. So now that all of the boxes have been checked, they now have given it the emergency use listing approval, and this could really be the tipping point for the global rollout of Chinese vaccines.
Well, Tony, this is coming at a time when the WHO is facing vaccine shortages. What is the significance of the announcement in the supply and availability of COVID-19 vaccines?
Well, the fact that the WHO, which is a global health regulator, has come out with its stamp of approval, this is going to be a big signal to other national health regulators that this is a safe and effective product. And in a lot of countries, they sometimes don't have enough resources to really do a rigorous investigation into each and every vaccine or medication that comes up to market. So they take a lot of their cues from the WHO. So that's important in that sense when it comes to a global rollout. Having this sign-off from the WHO also means that the Sinopharm vaccine is now eligible for the COVAX facility. That is that global program to distribute vaccines to mostly low-income countries. Sinopharm and actually Sinovac, another Chinese vaccine, had put in applications to join that program earlier this year. Sinovac, by the way, this other Chinese vaccine, just went under WHO review earlier this week. There's no time frame on when there could be a decision on that, but it should be coming probably within a similar, week or 2 weeks is what the WHO has indicated. Also, this approval gives Sinopharm a lot of global credibility. There had been some critics who said that the company had not released enough detailed data on its clinical trials, and also one of China's top health regulators had raised questions about the efficacy of Chinese vaccines overall. So now the WHO coming out and saying, yes, this is a safe and effective product to use, could again be the starting point for a much wider distribution of this vaccine worldwide.
Tony Waterman joining us there from Brussels. Thank you. Well, Ghana has received 350,000 doses of the AstraZeneca vaccine from the Democratic Republic of Congo. The DRC has been forced to redistribute its 1.3 million doses of the World Health Organization's COVAX facility it had received earlier in March. This is after projections that the Central African country will not have managed to administer all the vaccines before their expiry in June. The health officials in Ghana say the new batch will enable them administer second jabs at a time when their previously procured doses are almost over. Meanwhile, Tunisian Prime Minister Hichem Mechichi has announced a nationwide lockdown ahead of next week's Eid al-Fitr holiday. The new curfew is meant to ensure minimal spread of the virus during the festivities. Experts appointed by the International Court of Justice have asked Uganda to pay the Democratic Republic of Congo $215 million as compensation for looting its minerals and damaging its infrastructure during a conflict that occurred 23 years ago. The experts made the recommendation during the hearing of arguments in a reparations dispute between the DRC and Uganda at The Hague. Chris Ochamringa has that report from Kinshasa.
Legal and human rights experts told the World Court that Uganda should pay the DRC $215 million for looting and destroying property during an armed conflict The conflict occurred between 1998 and 2003 in the DRC's northeastern province of Ituri. The DRC accused Ugandan soldiers of destroying more than 8,000 houses and looting its gold and timber. But Uganda's lawyers argued that the DRC should produce evidence for the specific losses for which it seeks compensation. In 2005, the International Court of Justice ruled that Uganda had violated international law by occupying Ituri province with its troops and supporting other armed groups in the conflict. The court also ruled that the DRC violated international law by attacking the Ugandan embassy in Kinshasa. Judges asked the two countries to agree on the amount of money to pay each other, but they have since failed to come to an agreement. The court has concluded oral hearings and is now preparing to make its judgment. Chris Ochamringa, CGTN, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo.
Somalia has restored diplomatic relations with Kenya. Ties between the two countries were severed in December of last year after Somalia accused Kenya of interfering in its internal affairs. Relations between the countries have also been tense over the ownership of potential oil and gas deposits, some of which lie off the coast of Jubaland, which is one of Somalia's 5 semi-autonomous states. The Gulf state of Qatar helped broker talks that saw the resumption of ties. In a statement, Kenya's foreign ministry says it looks forward to further normalizing relations with Somalia in issues of trade, communication, transportation, people-to-people relations and cultural exchanges.
The federal government of Somalia announces that in keeping with the interests of good neighborliness, it has resumed diplomatic relations with the Republic of Kenya. The two governments agreed to keep friendly relations between the two countries on the basis of principles of mutual respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity, non-interference in each other's internal affairs, equality, mutual benefit, and peaceful coexistence.
Egypt and Turkey have been holding political consultations in Cairo as part of a push to mend ties between the regional rivals. The two countries have been at odds over their conflicting positions on the Muslim Brotherhood, the war in Libya, and maritime borders in the eastern Mediterranean. Adel Mahroui has the details.
Exploratory talks. That's how Egypt is describing its first official diplomatic meeting with Turkey in 8 years. Cairo is hosting those 2 days of talks led by the two nations' deputy foreign ministers.
This is a positive step. It is a tangible move following Turkey's shift in its policy towards Egypt. The criticism faded. It announced hopes to elevate the level of diplomatic representation. It is a good initiative that will look into building some confidence and trust.
These negotiations aim to begin a process to normalize bilateral ties and create alignment in regional conflicts. On the same day the Cairo talks began, the Turkish parliament approved creating a joint friendship committee that would include Libyan and Egyptian members of parliament. Turkey's and Egypt's support for opposing sides in the Libyan conflict is among the most concerning regional matters to both nations.
There are 4 main issues that are getting discussed: the Muslim Brotherhood members who reside in Turkey and how to hand over those legally convicted in Egypt, the Mediterranean economic maritime borders, Turkey's involvement in Libya, and Turkey's involvement in other Arab nations like Syria and Iraq. Egypt is representing itself and Arab nations in this round of talks.
Turkey and Egypt severed ties in 2013 after Ankara opposed Cairo's move to oust President Mohamed Morsi, a leading member of the Muslim Brotherhood. Turkey has been a safe haven for prominent members of the group. It is also the base for television channels the Brotherhood funded to lead media campaigns against the Egyptian government and President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi. The talks began after Ankara showed a change of heart. It called for better ties with Cairo. It also toned down the harsh criticism against President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi and the media channels it's hosting. After this round of talks, Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Cavusoglu says he will be discussing with his Egyptian counterpart upgrading diplomatic representation to the ambassador's level. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
You're watching Africa Live. Still ahead on the program. In the DRC, President Tshisekedi continues his purge on Kabila's allies as Tanganyika's governor is removed from office. Plus, we highlight the impact of climate change on African economies.
Its effects are surreal, but its existence is undeniable. Mother Nature is fighting back against a species that is destroying it.
We're here to raise our voices. We know that climate change has already started and it's killing us.
It hurts. Amid the tears and the grief, however, there is hope for resolution.
We need to live in harmony with nature.
We focus on the deeds, the deals, and the people working to make a difference. This is Surviving Climate Change, only on CGTN.
Lawmakers in the Democratic Republic of Congo have impeached the governor of the southeastern province of Tanganyika, Zoe Kabila. Mr. Kabila is the younger brother of former DRC President Joseph Kabila. He was accused of mismanaging affairs and disrespecting the provincial assembly. CGTN's Christo Chamringa returns with more.
13 provincial MPs from the DRC's Tanganyika province voted Governor Zoe Kabila out of office. The motion against Zoe Kabila accused him of poor governance and disrespecting national authorities and the provincial assembly. The governor is the younger brother of former DRC President Joseph Kabila. He was impeached in absentia, sparking angry reactions from members loyal to the former president. The move is widely seen as the latest purge of officials loyal to the former DRC leader. DRC President Felix Tshisekedi and his predecessor Joseph Kabila were embroiled in a power struggle last year that threatened to cause a political crisis. That led President Tshisekedi to break the power-sharing deal he signed with Joseph Kabila and install a new government dominated by people loyal to him. Christo Chamringa, CGTN, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo.
Now, parts of Africa are being ravaged by natural disasters at a frequency not seen in many decades. Countries in Eastern Africa are still struggling to deal with the worst invasion of desert locusts in nearly a century. Before that, Mozambique was battered by 2 tropical cyclones for the first time in recorded history. Here's CGTN's Ramanyang exploring why climate change is one of, if not the largest issue, facing many African economies today.
Thank you very much. Now, of course, in 2021, there's virtually no part of any of our lives or business activity which has not been touched in any way by climate change. We'll be exploring these changes in the course of this series, from nature's displacement of persons, be they hundreds or hundreds of thousands, to farming, to the challenge of deciding who should implement climate adaptations, and more importantly, at what cost. But first, let's take a look at the big picture.
The biggest problem now facing the world is climate change.
Climate change, an existential threat to not only the environment, but to the economy.
We are on the verge of the abyss.
Climate change has drastically altered what used to be somewhat steady, predictable weather patterns for hundreds of millions of us. But things are changing. And as you will see shortly, they're not changing for the better. The last 10 years have been described as a decade of exceptional heat. Those are not my words, but that's the description used by the World Meteorological Organization. 2020, you see, was one of the 3 warmest years on record. It was just after 2016 and just barely ahead of 2019. But these are dry numbers. It's one thing to say, here's the data. It's another thing entirely, though, to actually see and be subject to the effects of these changes. For millions around the world, this is not just dry numbers on an Excel spreadsheet or in a United Nations report. Take Sudan, for example. That country received some pretty heavy rainfall in 2020 that raised the Blue Nile to levels not seen in a century at around 17 meters. Water levels, in fact, had risen to a point where the pyramids of Meroe, these are structures that are over 2,000 years old, face the very real threat of being flooded and possibly irreparably damaged. With over 2 million hectares of farms flooded, over 1 million tons of grain destroyed, the extreme weather combined with the worst desert locust invasion in decades has left nearly 10 million people in Sudan deeply food insecure. But there was severe flooding in other parts of the continent too. The Niger River, for example, in West Africa, that also rose to record levels. With that much water sloshing around the continent, that also amplified yet another problem. The worst desert locust invasion that the Horn of Africa has had to deal with in decades, in some countries' cases in almost a century. Ethiopia, Kenya, Somalia, they all still continue to struggle with that problem, even in 2021. By the end of November, there were 30 named storms in the North Atlantic. That is the largest number so far on record. According to Christine Lagarde, the head of the European Central Bank, the estimated damage that you could essentially put in monetary terms attributable to natural hazards last year alone was on the order of $210 billion. That's essentially like taking the combined GDP of Kenya and Ethiopia and destroying that just through natural causes and nothing else. In financial circles, this has led to another emerging problem. In order to limit a rise in global average temperatures to less than 1.5 degrees Celsius, it essentially implies that a lot of oil and gas resources have to remain in the ground. But if you're a country that's heavily reliant on oil and gas revenue now, like Nigeria, or in the future, like Uganda, then these assets, as the Bank for International Settlements puts it, may suffer from unanticipated, sudden write-downs, devaluations, or conversion to liabilities. Put another way, these oil and gas assets may become worthless a lot faster than expected. But this then also raises another related argument. If oil and gas assets need to remain untouched and in the ground, then whose oil and gas assets should remain untouched? Should it be Nigeria and Angola, whose greenhouse gas emissions are nowhere near as large as those of the United States, which is among the top 3 oil producers in the world? How do you make that choice? That's just one of the many knotty questions that countries must tackle ahead of the UN Climate Change Conference later this year in November. In the meantime, though, the damage being inflicted by climate change continues. In 2019, tens of thousands of Kenyans living close to the shores of lakes in the Rift Valley were displaced by steadily rising water levels. From Lake Bogoria to Baringo to Naivasha, the rise of these lakes has been relentless, even today. As CGTN's Nick Mudimba now reports, experts are warning that this trend may not ease in future.
Early 2019 was tough for many near the Rift Valley lakes, surged to abnormal levels. Many residents who were born and raised in this area are still surprised. What was once their beauty and pride has now become a tormentor.
I've lived here all my life, and at one time the lake was about 3.5 kilometers away from where we're standing. It was all dry. That's in the 90s, early 90s.
In the lake, the threat is visible. Crocodiles are now closer than ever. The risk is clear. Just a few meters away, we spot a fisherman. His facial expression summarizes dejection. The amount of fish has greatly reduced, affecting their sole economic activity, and the well-being is shaky.
There was so much fish on this lake before, but now things have changed. There is no fish. Fishing frequency has reduced now. I only fish twice a day.
This school is one of the learning institutions in this region that was affected by the flooding waters. The evidence of its existence is all clear.
It's been more than 1 year since the students in this class enjoyed the comfort in the studies,
But right now, the climatic change wrath took no prisoners and they had to build on a higher ground for them to continue with education. The hope right now is actually just to pray that the waters will actually subside for them to come back and enjoy their education. Climatologist Jackson Kenyanjui is a PhD student taking agricultural meteorology and climate change at the Chinese Academy of Agricultural Sciences. He is also the founder of Climate Change Kenya.
The Rift Valley comes from a depression because first and foremost, the Rift Valley was formed through the tectonic activities. It moved. And science has shown that these tectonic movements actually move at a rate of these plates. They are separating at 1 centimeter every year. And the tectonic movements that we are exhibiting right now are in regard to one, we have the Nubian plate moving to the west, and we have the Somali plate moving to the east. They are all separating from the Arabian plate. So all these plates, once they are moving apart, expect that there is underground water. First of all, you have to notice that the earth is made up of 70% water. And in this 70% amount of water, not all of it is on the surface. We have underground water. So this underground water, some of it is stored in the aquifers. So once these tectonic plates start moving, expect this water now to come onto the surface. So that's now we see there's a surge in the increase in these water levels in this lake. Some of it is coming from underground.
Other causes include humanity use of fossil fuel, deforestation, increasingly intensive agriculture, global warming, waste disposal, among others. Climate change, biodiversity loss, waste and pollution are some of the pressing issues Kenya took to the floor of the United Nations Environment Assembly in February. Nick Mudimba, CGTN, Baringo, Kenya.
From East Africa, let's head south. South Africa is the most industrialized economy on the continent, but it's also the largest emitter of greenhouse gas emissions in Africa. Over 90% of the electricity generated and consumed in the country comes from coal-fired power plants. And two of those, in fact, Medupi and Kusile, are among the 10 largest in the world. CGTN's Sumitra Naidu takes up the story.
South Africa is responsible for half of Africa's total carbon emissions. That's because 90% of electricity in the country is generated from coal. Eskom, though, has been included in government's plans to reduce emissions.
In the context of our history and where we're going to in the future, what's important to bear in mind is that the coal plants that are contributing to the emissions were built many, many years ago. And so we see that as we shut down those plants now and start to replace them with lower carbon technologies, we will have a positive impact on the NDC targets and our contribution to the Paris Agreement. I think our role is very pivotal and key to South Africa achieving its NDC targets.
The long-term emissions pathway will see South Africa's emissions peak, then begin to plateau before eventually dropping down to net zero emissions by 2050. But the strategy also concedes substantial and rapid emission cuts are required. However, it comes with risks to economic growth and sustainable development. Shutting down coal means investing heavily in renewables and cutting jobs. There's an estimated 82,000 people working at the mines, with an additional 50,000 in companies that burn coal.
We see a lot of opportunity coming in the development of renewable technologies themselves, where there's potential to create a large number of jobs through the value chain of renewable energy development, especially if we do renewable energy at scale. There's a huge potential for us to manufacture solar panels, but also on the wind side, things like the gantries, like the poles, the towers, all of those things that you need. There's a possibility for us to manufacture in the country. So yes, there will be job losses, but there will be job creation.
Several old coal-fired powered stations are due to be decommissioned over the next 10 years as part of South Africa's new climate strategy. But its success will depend on political will and deep pockets.
All lenders and investors must urgently end financing for any new fossil fuel projects, and they must implement plans to responsibly phase out financing to existing fossil fuel projects. Because every single fossil fuel project that is currently planned or underdevelopment is decreasing our chances of reaching the goals of Paris.
Parliament is expected to adopt higher ambitions for South Africa's emission reduction contributions in line with the Paris Climate Accord by June, ahead of COP26. A new presidential commission on climate change has also been established to ensure the country makes the changes that are needed. Sumitra Nadu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
So then, from South Africa, let's head west. With per capita carbon emissions of barely 0.7 tons back in 2017, Nigeria's emissions are a fraction of other countries on the continent. The equivalent figure for South Africa in that year was 12 times higher. Now, despite its small emissions footprint, Nigeria has seen a steep rise in extreme heat and accelerated desertification. The latter is partly responsible for exacerbating the conflict that we're seeing between pastoralists and farmers, especially in the country centre. Here's CGTN's Deja Badmus with that story.
This seaside community in Lagos is a clear example of the visible impact climate change is having on Nigeria. The Alpha Beach community is rapidly being submerged because of rising ocean levels in this part of Lagos, threatening this community of over 10,000 people. In the north of the country, desert encroachment and drought are driving people further inland. This often leads to clashes between farmers and pastoralists who are in search of water and pasture for their herds. Analysts blame it all on climate change.
When we have this long series of droughts, the soil, thickens, and if eventually it rains, rather than the soil absorbing the water, that will be difficult because of the hardness of the soil. So the water will not be able to percolate and it begins to flow, and that creates a flash flooding, which is what we've been having in the Middle Belt.
This is a common sight in Nigeria's oil-rich Niger Delta. Gas flaring is a huge environmental challenge in the region. Data from the country's National Oil Spill Detection and Response Agency, NOSDRA, shows that Nigeria flared 1.7 billion cubic feet of gas between 2012 and 2020, valued at $6 billion.
The impact of gas flaring is very, very significant. It is a waste of resources. In one of the reports of the World Bank, it was explicitly reported that the gas being flared is enough to power the whole of the African continent.
Gas flaring and oil spillage combined to make Nigeria's Niger Delta region one of the most polluted places on the planet. The government had targeted to end gas flaring last year, but it missed it, leaving the country to aim for the 2030 target of the Paris Accord. It's also facing challenges in addressing the devastation caused by oil spillage in the Delta region. But the government is driving a campaign for cleaner energy. It's pledged to cut its greenhouse gas emissions by 20% by 2030. It's also launched an ambitious plan to have 1 million cars run on gas by the end of this year.
Nigeria will champion those initiatives that will surprise the rest of the Africans. Just keep your fingers crossed in the next few weeks as you see some more initiatives that are coming from the Office of the Federal Minister of Environment in tackling climate change beyond what we know.
There is indeed a gravitation towards cleaner energy in Nigeria. More solar panels are popping up on rooftops across the country. The government itself has launched a massive solar power project aiming at 5 million solar connections for off-grid communities. A local automobile firm recently unveiled the first locally assembled electric car in the country. So everything seems to be coming together as Nigeria shifts towards cleaner energy. But then, a lot of work still lies ahead. Deja Badmus, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
Let's head over to North Africa. People living along Tunisia's coastline are increasingly becoming vulnerable to rising sea levels. Increasing coastal erosion and warmer sea waters are also threatening habitats that are vital to sustaining human activity and marine biodiversity too. As CGTN's Adin Chouachi now reports, for a country where 1 in 10 people are employed in the tourism sector, these changes are a significant problem.
Hassan is a fisherman in the city of La Goulette in northern Tunisia. He was born and raised near the port, where he now earns a living through fishing. Hassan says climate change has had a negative impact on his work.
Fish populations are declining and fish food is becoming rarer as the sea warms. Some species have disappeared from this area over the past 4 decades. They were replaced by some invasive species. The decline in the size of fish is also noticeable, while the quantity is very limited.
Experts have warned that diseases affecting some marine species are spreading. Many traditional fishermen fear they will lose their main source of income due to climate change.
Climate change is impacting fisheries. The local economy depends on fishing. Thousands of jobs could be lost if the state doesn't act quickly.
The country's Secretary of State of the Sea says climate change poses a major challenge. The Tunisian government has launched several projects to protect sandy beaches and coastal aquifers.
The state is providing the necessary means and financial resources to protect the coastline and the population, especially fishermen who depend on the sea. In addition, Tunisia's coastline has a huge potential for the development of the blue economy. There is an urgent need to build the marine ecosystem's resilience against climate change.
A recent study by the Tunisian Union of Agriculture and Fisheries has revealed that climate change has affected some fish species that have shifted away from shallow coastal waters, where temperatures will increase fastest, into deeper, colder waters. The partnership between the Department of Maritime Affairs and several international organizations, as well as the civil society, aims to improve livelihoods on the coastline. Tunisian authorities have urged Mediterranean countries to cooperate in order to limit the impact of climate change. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
And that story from Tunisia, a country on the shores of the Mediterranean, wraps up this snapshot of how climate change isn't just changing government policy. It's changing how we do business. It's changing our daily lives across a continent that's home to over 1 billion people. As the Paris Climate Agreement turns 5 this year, the question of what is the ideal adaptation path and who will bear the costs of that adaptation still remains. Back to you in studio.
Well, let's now go to Uche Okoronkwo for a look at the day's business news. Uche.
Thank you, Beatrice. And coming up on Africa Live Biz. Zimbabwe lists an infrastructure bond for the first time in 20 years. And Sudan restricts commodity imports to ease forex shortages in the country.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Well, our starting point tonight is in Zimbabwe, where the government has announced plans to list a bond on the local exchange. The $250 million listing by the Infrastructure Development Bank of Zimbabwe will be the first note issuance on the Zimbabwe Stock Exchange since 2001. Now, Zimbabwe is looking to raise funds for the expansion and upgrade of a main highway that links the country to its largest trading partner, South Africa. Total trade between the two nations stood at about $2.4 billion last year. The 580-kilometer road links the capital Harare to Beitbridge. It's one of Africa's busiest border points. And according to officials, on average, about 25,000 people and 500 trucks pass through the border point daily. Let's go to Sudan now. The country has taken steps to streamline strategic commodities and to stop non-essential imports months after a sharp currency devaluation. The Sudanese central bank devalued the pound in February in a bid to unify official and black market exchange rates, and that's amid worsening hard currency shortages and a crippling economic crisis in the country. Here's Adel El Maroui with more on this report.
After Sudan introduced an 85% devaluation of its pounds in February, the government appeared to have managed foreign currency prices. Yet in recent days, the black market began to re-emerge, with the US dollars trading at up to £400, 18 more pounds than the official rate. Moving rapidly to regain control over the forex markets, the government restricted importing non-essential goods.
We have been calling for that step for years. It lifts the pressing demand on the dollar. It will also stop the flood of foreign currency to merchants, who in turn trade in dollars and create the parallel unofficial forex market. The control on imports will definitely curb that phenomenon.
But not everyone is happy with the new imports restrictions, especially that the government has not announced a clear list of the banned items.
To restrict imports of non-essential goods shows that the government is hesitant in its economic policy. It should be heading to a free market policy, but it takes contradictory measures. Also, we need a clear definition of what these complementary goods are. Maybe some people would consider them essential.
The political instability that followed President Omar al-Bashir's ouster saw Sudan fall into a deep economic crisis. Inflation reached a phenomenal 340%, putting immense pressure on the African nation, which is now seeing shortages in strategic goods and essential medicines.
Sudan is turning into a 100% consuming society. We import shoes in terrible quality and clothes. That must stop. We must go back to producing these products domestically. The government should direct the dollars saved into bringing in raw material to boost manufacturing domestically.
Currently, the Sudanese central bank only allows commercial banks to sell foreign currencies to customers for specific purposes. That includes travel, education fees, medical treatment, or the import of goods. Moving to guarantee a steady flow of foreign currencies into the country, the Sudanese government will soon announce a list of incentives at banks to encourage remittances to enter the country through official channels. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
And now to some international news. India's diamond hub of Surat is facing a production crisis as 60% of migrant workers leave, fearing a coronavirus lockdown. And that's following an unprecedented surge in cases. Now, India on a Friday reported a record daily rise in coronavirus cases of 414,188, while deaths from COVID-19 swelled by 3,915. Meanwhile, Gujarat state has been reporting over 10,000 new cases daily over the past couple of days, prompting the government to consider other kinds of restrictions on non-essential businesses. Last year, millions of migrant workers took an arduous journey on foot, bicycles and hitchhiking to reach their homes after the federal government announced a surprise lockdown. About 100 people lost their lives in the journey back home.
All those who work in our factories, about 50 to 60% of them have moved back to their villages. We are really feeling their absence. They have left because of a build-up to the lockdown. They are scared that if a lockdown is imposed, then they will anyway have to go to their villages because they experienced the hardships of the first lockdown. They already left as a preemptive move.
A lot of workers have left, including those in the machinery segment. The diamond industry works on 5 to 6 stages. It takes many levels to get the polished diamond. There is a shortage of workers starting from the first stage itself, so it is obvious that the rest of the production is also affected. So there is a shortage of items in the industry.
Meanwhile, China's exports from the private sector saw a jump in the first 4 months of the year, totaling 5.5 trillion yuan. That's up more than 40% year-on-year. And its products, ranging from food to home appliances, have proved their popularity overseas, as Song Yaotin reports.
This auto-cleaning robot can feel where the stain is and adjust its water and suction power. It can also remove dirty water to avoid secondhand pollution. It's produced by a company in eastern China's Jiangsu province, and it's just one of a dozen of new products catering to our new sanitizing needs following the COVID-19 pandemic.
This set of products catered to the needs of people who are more conscious about sanitation. We have received a large amount of orders selling to 30-plus countries.
Thanks to high-tech products like these, the eastern city of Suzhou is making a brand for itself, from made in Suzhou to smart manufacturing of Suzhou. The city has seen sales of 200 billion yuan of high-tech products from January to April, up 30% year-on-year. Central and Western China also saw robust growth, with its exports jumping 39% on year in value. Liuzhou's luo sifen, or river snail rice noodle, has grown from a street food to an export specialty. Apart from classic flavors, this company has also developed a tomato version for the European market and spicy flavors for the Southeast Asian market.
7 million yuan of our river snail rice noodles have been exported to other countries over the first 4 months, and that is 4 times compared to the same period last year. Outbound countries and regions have increased to over 20, and it's been a spotlight for local exports.
China's exports to Belt and Road countries also rose 25% year-on-year for the first 4 months of this year. Walnuts from Hetian in Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region was one of the contributors. Their walnuts are highly prized for their thin shells and large nuts, and they usually grow in unpolluted soil with enough light and heat all year round.
Our company alone exported 1,300 tons of walnuts from January to April, up 10% on year. We mainly export to Belt and Road countries like Turkey and Russia.
Boarding the China-Europe Railway Express, it only takes 2 months for these nuts to arrive on Europe's dining table. In fact, Xinjiang's walnuts now account for 30% of Europe's market share. That's not the only food product the region boasts. Exports of tomatoes, peaches, dates, and roses from Xinjiang are also seeing a boost to Belt and Road countries. Song Yaotian, CGTN.
Well, that's all for now on Africa Live Biz, but ahead on Global Business Africa, more on cryptocurrencies on the continent as payments giant Visa and mobile financial services provider Tala partner to boost cryptocurrency adoption in emerging markets. Of course, all that are coming up top of the hour. For now, back to you, Beatrice.
Uche, thank you. And we still have more news for you here in the program. Here's what's ahead. Your sports news and Africa qualifiers for the 2022 World Cup postponed